Hello, I'm Andy Agathangelo, and I'm very proud to be the founder of Transparency Task Force, the certified social enterprise that is dedicated, and I do mean dedicated, to promoting the interest of the consumer in the world of financial services. We believe, we know that the financial sector is profoundly important to the well-being of society, to economic stability, to political stability too. We also know, very sadly, that it has a remarkably high predisposition to misbehave if given the chance to do so. Whether or not it misbehaves is largely a function of how it's being regulated. So the work of the financial regulators and associated entities like the Financial Ombudsman Service is of enormous interest to us. Enormous interest to us. So this is very, very important stuff. I'm going to spend a few minutes recapping on the recent story so far. I emphasize the word recent there because my story in relation to this goes back just a few months. Paul's story to this goes back more than a decade, and he's done an amazing job in coping with it all and being able to harness the lived experience that he and his family have had and turned it into a very potent package and purposeful message. He delivered part one a couple of weeks ago. Paul got ill. We had to delay part two. Part two is happening now, and it's a really big and important message. So here we go. I'm going to share my screen just to walk you through a couple of slides to help get the importance of this across. I hope I do the topic justice. I'm going to do this partly to recap. Okay, so as you know, folks, we're talking about the car finance scandal, the complete expose, part two. A brief recap on PPI. The reason we're talking about PPI is, until now, it's been the biggest single financial scandal the UK has ever known. £50 billion worth of damage caused by misconduct by the banking sector that caused huge losses for individuals, i.e., wasted premiums on a product they couldn't actually use. It caused extensive reputational damage to the sector. And of course, it caused corrosion of the public's trust and confidence in the economy and the financial sector, acting as a brake on growth. Both the FSA and then the FCA were shown to have failed consumers. They were either unwilling and or unable to get on top of the widespread systemic misconduct that was going on. The regulators were seen to be weak and incompetent, and it really did cause quite a ruckus, quite rightly so. The FSA successor role, the FSA as successors to the FSA were given a job to do, which included rebuilding trust and confidence. That was one of the mandates that they were given. Question for everybody, of course, is have they done that? Has the FCA rebuilt trust and confidence in the UK's financial sector? The media, consumer groups, everybody very heavily criticised what was going on. And the Parliamentary Commission on Standards said that the regulatory response to the scandal was timid. The PPI scandal was one of the factors that led the FSA to be abolished and become the FCA. Okay, we move on because a few weeks ago there was the excellent BBC File on 4 Investigates programme, which, forgive me, the excellent File on 4 programme, all about the car finance scandal, led by Helen Catt and her colleague Philip. Paul will tell us the surname in a moment. I've just momentarily forgotten. Helen and Phil's work was absolutely superb. It featured, as you probably realise, extensive input by Mr. Paul Carlier. However, like any documentary or programme or article, there were limits on what could be said because of reasons such as time limits. So the idea became what could be done to fill in the gaps and to expand on the detail that could not be included in the programme. That's why we ran the car finance scandal expose number one. Now, last time we talked about the upcoming Mansion House speech. We talked about the expectation in the media that consumer protection might be in jeopardy. At the time, we thought that might be the case. But none of us could have been prepared for what actually happened. What did happen? Well, what happened is what we could now think of as Reformageddon. 15th of July, the Mansion House reforms, the Leeds reforms, the statements from the FCA and the PRA, basically overhauling the system. Big question, How much parliamentary scrutiny had there been in what they were planning to do? I think virtually none. How much of those reforms were obviously in the interest of consumers? I think none or hardly any. How many of those reforms were in the interest of the industry that the FCA regulates? Pretty much all of them. How many of those reforms were in effect a function of the Financial Conduct Authority, a regulator that's meant to be independent of government, becoming an instrument of government? You can answer that one yourself. There's a lot of concern about these issues, a lot of concern about whether the FCA has gone over the line and allowed itself to become merely an instrument of government. As a response to the Mansion House and these reforms, we, TTF, issued a letter to the Treasury Committee. We'll provide links to it just in case you haven't yet seen it. But the key point being that we said to the Treasury Committee, these changes represent the most significant rollback of protections since the global financial crisis. And I still stand by that statement. What we didn't know was that on Saturday after, there was going to be a money box program. And that money box program included a first-class piece of work by Paul Lewis, the presenter, when he interviewed Charlotte Clark, the FCA's Director of Consumers and Competition. I must have listened to probably hundreds of interviews on Moneybox. I've never come away from an interview on Moneybox feeling the way that I felt about what was said and how it was said. So much so that I immediately reached out to Deception Detection Lab Limited, who kindly agreed at no cost to TTF to produce a report on the linguistics, the analysis of what was actually said, looking for evidence of potential deception, looking to see whether there were attempts by the interviewee to not answer the questions, deflect from the questions, give fudgy, vague answers, give answers that would be difficult to be held to account on later, to misinform, to deceive. And that organization, Deception Detection Lab Limited, worked over the weekend on Monday to produce that report. And on the strength of the report, we then sent our next letter to the Treasury Committee. So this was on Tuesday morning last week. Sorry, forgive me, Tuesday morning this week. And we said very simply, the reason for writing is that I believe there were statements made by Charlotte Clark, the FCA's Director of Consumers and Competition, that ought to be of interest to the committee. And this is the test. If the Treasury Committee is interested and demonstrably shows that it is interested in what was said, then at least that part of the hierarchy of oversight is working. At least that bit of it is working. That gives us hope. That gives us hope that there are parliamentarians who are going to scrutinize, challenge, hold to account what the regulator is doing. We've asked the Treasury Committee to open an inquiry. We've asked the Treasury Committee to do what we believe it was set up to do, which is to hold the regulators to account. And I'm hoping that the Treasury Committee does do this. I'm hoping they ask, why did you introduce these reforms and these consultations without much parliamentary involvement, it would seem? How are these changes going to affect consumers? Yes, we understand that the UK PLC wants to grow, but is it wise, sensible, safe and prudent for economic growth in the financial sector to be stimulated by a function of encouraging people to take on investment risk that they may not actually be comfortable with? Is there a risk that you're going to create a bubble, and all kinds of other such questions as set out in our letter to that committee on Tuesday morning? We then had the event on Tuesday night to discuss it all. That was pretty interesting indeed. I'm very pleased that we had that. But since then, the bit that happened that none of us, as far as I know, were actually expecting to happen, yesterday happened. Paul Carlier got in contact with me early yesterday morning. God, it seems like weeks ago, Paul, doesn't it? Early yesterday morning, Andy, I think there may be a press release about a press conference about to happen about Carlo's case, Carlo and Tom Hayes's case. He was right. There was, and the press conference announced that they had won their case. Now, if you don't know anything about this case, it is the most significant case imaginable. Paul will, I'm sure, elaborate on this. Please do, Paul. Please feel free to go there because it's so important. This case, in my opinion, demonstrates provable collusion, corruption, and cover up. Sue me if I'm wrong, folks. Sue me if I'm wrong. The book shown there is Andy Verity's book called Rigged. Myself and maybe some others of you here were in Parliament when that book was launched. There was a panel session. Carlo was there speaking. Tom was there speaking. Several of the other victims were speaking. A man who was innocent called Paul Johnson. Paul, please do talk about Paul Johnson. Paul ended up pleading guilty, knowing he was innocent, to stop him getting extradited to the States. That's how kippered up these people were. That's how engineered and contrived the situation was. And then we had the appeals court doing all it could for several years to stop Tom and Carlo and the others having a chance for justice. Folks, before we do anything else, can we please celebrate together, but with our applause, to honor the work of Carlo and Tom, all the others, the legal teams, the politicians who supported them, because they have just won the single biggest David versus Goliath battle I can imagine and I've ever been in any way connected to since TTF has started. Well done, Tom. Well done, Carlo. We continue to want to do anything we can to help. And if you don't see how that story fits into what Paul Carley is going to be talking about, you will by the end of the evening. Brace yourselves, folks. This is going to be fan-bloody-tastic, all right? This is going to be fantastic because we're dragging the truth to the surface the way that we can, the way that we do, the way that we can, the way that we do. And there is nobody on this planet better at doing it than the Romford Rain Man, the one-man army, Mr. Paul Cardier. Show our appreciation, folks. Paul, over to you. Thank you very, very much. Thank you. I'm joyous. Thank you, Paul.
Thanks, Andy. Yeah, I mean, yesterday, incredible result, as Andy said, because there was what Tom was up against wasn't just one arm of the hierarchy of oversight. It was the FCA, the SFO, it was the Bank of England, it was the Cabinet Office, it was HM Treasury, it was the then Chancellor George Osborne who motivated all of this to score political points and get some heads on spikes so we look like we've done something and we can embarrass Labour because of their manipulation and lowballing during the crisis. And then obviously against a questionable judiciary. The judge was parachuted in at the last minute and as you can see from yesterday's judgment, I mean, it's mammoth judgment by the Supreme Court, and it lists reams of errors of law by the judge. I mean, I think it was twice in front of the jury. The judge turned to Tom's counsel and said, you know, it's not too late for your client to plead guilty. I mean, completely prejudicing the case. I mean, and he did it throughout. And as Andy mentioned, that the appeal court repeatedly refused leave to escalate it to the Supreme Court. And, you know, it was by chance I discovered a piece of evidence last year. We'll tell this story another time, but the odds of me finding it were needle in a haystack, and it came the week after the appeal court had denied Tom's appeal on the basis that no, the rules of libel were clear. You had to submit the lowest rate at which you could borrow. They pinned their entire thing on that rule. It was never a rule, and the document I found a week later proved it was never a rule, but it had never been disclosed to Tom or his defence. So, you know, but our cases overlap. I was working for UBS in Zurich when the LIBOR scandal erupted. And I'll tell this story, Andy, before I get on, because this gives you an idea of what it's like. I was in Zurich. I commuted back and forth every flew home Friday, flew back there on Sunday night. I come in one Monday morning with my coffee in hand, come into the trading floor, and as you came into the trading floor, there was a wall on the left before it opened out into the big expanse. But on the right, there was rows of trading desks where all the LIBOR traders and money market traders typically sat. I walked through the door, and then I stop in my tracks with my coffee in hand, and I'm looking to the right, and there's these banks of desks which are normally packed with empty. Like literally, and I'm sitting there thinking, or standing there, hang on, is it a Swiss bank holiday day? Could I have had an extra day at home with the family? And then I could hear some noise from around the corner. So I kind of walked slowly forward and I'm looking at these banks of desks. As the dealer room opened out and I can see my desks where I worked and my boss on the left, I'm pointing over my shoulder and saying, what? And my boss is going like, zip, shh, don't say anything. And we were literally an hour later, we were called to a meeting. It was all done in face-to-face meetings. Nothing was in writing. And LIBOR became, it was Voldemort, that which shall not be mentioned. We were absolutely prohibited from talking about it. If anyone asked, you just plead ignorance and don't even talk about it internally. No one is to use the term in an email. No one is to use the term. And I mean, we were seriously threatened. I mean, it was pretty intimidating stuff. And you know what they did, they interviewed everybody UBS involved in Switzerland, and because it was in Switzerland, all of these interviews remained absolutely confidential under Swiss banking law. You know, so you weren't allowed to discuss them. So they did that with one law firm, then quietly got rid of that law firm who had identified various, obviously, things or issues, brought a new law firm in, and obviously this law firm had plausible deniability because obviously some of the more incriminating stuff was now known to UBS and quietly filed away. But what they did, they identified one of the lowest ranking juniors from that department, hauled him over to Germany, interviewed him there, and then pinned the whole thing on him. They served him up as a scapegoat because they could then disclose everything that was in the interviews because it was outside of Switzerland. They did the same in FX. I mean, the whole thing is a scandal. And it was UBS and their lawyers that drove the entire prosecution investigation of Tom. Once it became clear that UBS were on the hook, they were more than happy to cooperate and serve Tom up. Tom was the perfect scapegoat because he was a non-Swiss national, and until you've worked in Switzerland and for a Swiss bank, you don't realise how sensitive they are to foreigners, shall we say. And he was no longer working at UBS. And when he did work at UBS, he was in Tokyo, as far away from head office as possible. So he was the perfect patsy. And yeah, what's going to come out in the next few years or the next few months is going to be quite extraordinary. So, and my story overlaps even further because inadvertently on the 1st of June, a week into Tom's trial, I wrote to the SFO regarding FX wrongdoing and about Lloyd's, but I mentioned the fact that a recent decision in fines in the US, where most banks have been fined 2 billion for FX wrongdoing, but UBS had escaped any fines because they'd entered into this, you know, they'd made these representations to secure an immunity agreement, and they'd lied. So I write to the SFO and say, right, but I need to refer you to these decisions in the US. It looks like UBS senior management have lied to secure immunity from FX sanctions and fines. So, but unbeknown to me, and has been confirmed by Tom, that basically indirectly supported one of Tom's defences, that UBS senior management were aware of everything he did and never raised the problem. I was alleging that senior management in FX were not only aware of it, they were involved in it themselves. So the SFO do not respond to me until August the 3rd when they invite me in for an interview. August the 3rd just happened to be the day Tom was convicted. So they didn't want to hear what I had to say in case it exposed their case against Tom, because what I'd written in the email was, it suggested it could have done. And Tom's of the opinion, when I shared with him everything I had, it could have made a difference. But obviously they didn't, they waited till Tom was convicted before bringing me in. And at the meeting, they didn't want to know about Lloyd's. All they wanted to know was about UBS. They wanted to know what I knew. And, and then obviously Tom appeals it. So my notes were disclosable to Tom for his appeal, and they didn't disclose them. And so there's a whole other can of worms, and we'll get to that they needed to get Tom prosecuted so that the Americans could then go after Matt Connolly, who was convicted and had his quashed as well. So, but there's a whole load of overlaps, but we'll get to that another time. So I'm going to start with part 2 of the car finance scandal. I'm going to share my screen. Right, so I'm conscious of the fact that some of you will have seen some of these slides before, or slides similar in the part 1 we did with the FCA. So I will try and I'll go through as quick as I can. There's 60 slides here, so I'm going to be quite quick. Now, a lot of them are text heavy, and the reason for that is so that basically you can watch the video back at your leisure, and you can just pause on when a slide comes up and digest it, and at your leisure. So anyway, I'm going to start with this. 20th of July 2023, 3 class actions filed with the Competition Tribunal against Black Horse Motor Nova and Santander, seeking £1 billion in damages for customers who were missold car finance. These class actions were the result of my journey that began in 2012, and that was necessary to take to a law firm after every effort I'd made, every report I'd made was just buried or ignored by the FCA and the Ombudsman. So this was a huge deal. Finally we're going to get some justice. So, but I mean, it took 18 months after I first shared the info and the intelligence with the lawyers to get this file. But and here's the email from Belinda Holway, the partner at Scott and Scott. We've just filed the claims. We need to get out and celebrate. This is such a big deal. It was an incredible class actions. So, and I need to share this with you as well. This is from Scott and Scott, the law firm that Belinda worked for. This is from their briefing document that they took to litigation funders. So you get the evidence, you look at it, you prepare the case, and then you go to a litigation funder to see if they will are prepared to fund the case. So, and as you can see, it confirms that all of this was based upon my evidence that I brought forward. And I mean, all of these paragraphs here, they're referring to key things we can prove as a result of the evidence I've got. All evidence that I gave to the FCA and that they had buried. And as you can see, they reiterate again that I brought this to their attention. So without me bringing it to their attention, there is no £1 billion class action. So now this class action also threatened to expose the FCA and the Ombudsman and what the dishonestly limited final notice that the FCA had produced in March 2019 following a 2-year investigation. An investigation that I hounded them, badgered them for a year with all the evidence, and I was getting knocked back. But basically the class actions obviously were based upon my evidence. The FCA knew this, and all of this was going to come out in court. And then everyone's going to ask the question, hang on, how the hell did the FCA not take action themselves? Why did they not, sanction these firms and get redress for consumers? So this was going to expose potentially what I think is the biggest fraud by a UK public body in history. The FCA produced what they knew to be a dishonestly limited final notice with intent to protect the firms and deprive millions of consumers of the billions of pounds in redress that they knew they were owed. Right? I mean, Black Horse weren't even mentioned in the final notice. The final notice didn't even cover that which I'd exposed to the FCA. I'd given them chapter and verse on Black Horse and literally not mentioned, nor were 3 other practices. So they had revealed the existence of these incentivized commission arrangements, but they just touched upon it. And in January 24, the FOSS upheld 2 decisions, one against Black Horse, one against Barclays. Now, this was not them coming to a different clue. This was not on behalf of consumers. This was done as part of a strategy between the FCA and the Ombudsman, whereby, because they were going to be exposed, because the Ombudsman, and as you're going to see in 2019, has got blood on its hands in terms of like redress anyway for consumers as well. So that's going to be exposed. What have they got to do? Well, they've got to kill the class actions. And the only way you're going to do that is set up your own redress scheme. So it was agreed that the Ombudsman would uphold 2 decisions, and then the FCA could go, oh, wow, with like mock ignorance and say, oh, in that case, we need to have another look at this. right? And they immediately announced an investigation, and then within a month they were talking about there was going to be a redress scheme. It was all nonsense. There was nothing that the FCA knew at this time or could possibly learn from this new investigation that they didn't already know in March 19 when they published that dishonestly limited final notice, and they didn't know in 2016 when I gave them all of the evidence. So it was an absolute disgrace. Now, Lindsay Rogerson of Reuters, who some of you will be familiar with, incredible journalist, really gets to the heart of it and understands the consumer side of things inside out. She asked the FCA what you hope to learn from this, and and they lied to her. They said that this new review was completely different. They claimed that in the previous investigation they had not undertaken any case file reviews, and so had no idea as to potential damages. That was false, because when Lindsay published her article, she included in it, the statement that she'd just been given, but she included an extract from a document that the FCA themselves had published years earlier, where it confirms they had undertaken case reviews and had made estimates as to certain damages that customers had been subject to. They literally lied. Of course they did, because the true reason for the new review was to conceal the dishonesty from years before. So, right, my journey. This here is a photo of a paper document that basically, I don't know if you can see here, 22nd of May, 2012, right? The day before, my mother-in-law had called to give Black Horse authority for me to speak on her account. So this is a document from Black Horse Files that I got under a DSAR a few years ago. And as you can see, where is it? They logged a complaint, nature, interest and APR. I complained on the 22nd of May 2012 that the APR my mother-in-law got was wholly inappropriate relative to her credit score, right? Black Horse just denied everything, said it was appropriate, and I didn't at the time have any evidence to prove it. Fast forward to December 15, and some of you probably heard this before and in the BBC documentary, buying a car with my wife. She needed a new car, so get introduced to Essex car dealer by a good friend of mine. I said, oh yeah, speak to my mate Chris the car dealer, and typical Essex car dealer. So he sorts her out a car, finance from Black Horse at 8.9%. And in passing, I just literally said, that's a much better rate than my mother-in-law got. And in response, he said, let me guess, 14%? And I was, yeah, how the hell do you know? And he then just literally proceeded to spill all the beans. Now, he wasn't confessing or anything because he didn't think there was anything wrong with this, but he literally told me how the whole scam worked, and it was all I could do to stop my jaw hitting the table. So basically, what he told me, and then he turned his screen round and showed me how it all worked, how the system worked. So Black Horse gave him an APR band. It turns out it was 3.9% to 14.9% to work within, and they left it to him to set the APR. So, and he puts every detail about the customer, the car, the price, part exchange, everything. So at the point he submits the application, Black Horse know as much as he does. And I said, but do they share with you the credit score information? No. They never share the credit score information with us. I said, but the APR is determined by your status, and your status is your credit score. So the credit score doesn't just determine whether or not you get finance, it determines also what your APR is. The better your credit score, the lower the APR. The worse your credit score, the higher. And obviously, if you've got really poor credit, you end up in subprime territory, ridiculous, which we're all familiar with from the financial crisis. And then importantly, the higher the APR in the bands he applied, the bigger the commission Black Horse would pay. And I'm just like, oh my God, that's unlawful. It's a breach of Consumer Credit Act. It's also a breach of Plevin, because November 14, the Supreme Court ruled in Plevin versus Paragon, and it's the so-called PPI judgment. The Supreme Court ruled that, and this is I'm paraphrasing here, but this is the summary of what they ruled. They ruled that it was a breach of the Consumer Credit Act for a financial product to be priced on a whatever you could get away with basis in terms of what you thought that customer might pay. and in the interest of just greater profits for those parties involved in the sale of the product. So this was absolutely a breach of Plevin, right? And it was a breach of and Plevin was establishing that was a breach of the Consumer Credit Act. So, and I was FCA authorised and regulator. I'd worked in the markets for years. I knew this. So I immediately rush home and I submit a new complaint to Black Horse. So Black Horse denied the complaint in January 16. At the bottom here, you can see what they write. They say, Black Horse say to me, we can confirm that the APR was determined by the score that was obtained from Experian. An absolute lie, because Black Horse did the credit scoring when the dealer put the information in, but Black Horse never shared that credit score information with the dealer. But it was the dealer that set the APR. So, and then if you look here, it says, I can confirm the dealership does not have access to our systems to amend the APR. Absolute lie. The systems allow you to put the APR up and down anywhere within that band. And obviously they're incentivized to put it as high as possible. So it was packed with false representations. So I escalate that complaint to the Ombudsman. And before I do that, this is they said the dealership offered a loan type that you accepted. Well, yeah, because she was told that's the only loan type there was, right? They didn't tell her that she could have had it at 3.9% APR if the dealer had put it through and not 14.9%. But the dealer said these were the best terms that were available, right? But in a D-side a couple of years later, we would also find out that they disclosed, the dealer, that there were two other finance offers that they got, one at 8% and one at 9% from two different lenders that they never shared with her at the point of sale. Instead, they told her 14.9% best there was, and obviously that would give them the maximum commissions possible from Black Horse. So 2016,
Paul, can I just come in there with a real quick point? I think I made this point last time. We're not just talking about numbers here, folks, are we? These differences in the interest rates the customer actually ends up paying is potentially of real significance to that person's cash flow, right? Month to month, week to week. Do we buy these groceries or not? So what people are shelling out on their car finance might be of massive significance to them as far as week to week, month to month cash flow is concerned. But also, the harsh reality is they might come out of the car dealership with, let's say, a Vauxhall car, when they could have come out of the dealership with a Mercedes for the same monthly cost had they been treated fairly. That's the significance of this. Real money, real lives, real people, real cars. Back to you, Paul. Thank you.
And to give you a clue, I mean, I escalate this to the Ombudsman in 2016, and it was my position. I went through the whole thing. It was my position that she was therefore entitled to a compensation equal to the difference that she had paid in interest on the APR she got given, and what she would have paid in interest had she been given the 3.9% lowest rate. Because the fact that Black Horse offered a band of 3.9% to 14.9% to the dealer, and they would approve, as long as you passed a very low threshold on credit score, they would approve whatever the finance or whatever APR the dealer put it through at. So that establishes they would have lent to her at 3.9%. Had the dealer put it through at 3.9%, and they would lend to anybody at 3.9% if the dealer put it through. But obviously nobody got that because they were unlawfully incentivizing the dealer to put the highest possible APR on it. So that's what I was asking for. I calculated that difference to be £4,500. Now this is not on a massively, it was a Ford S-Max, £20,000 car, so fairly average and typical. But the damage to her was the difference between the interest she paid on the APR she got and what she could have got at 3.9%. It's £4,500 over a 4-year deal, right? That's a lot of money, and especially for a pensioner. Let's not forget she was a pensioner, and at the point I escalated it to the Ombudsman, they knew she was a cancer suffering pensioner as well, and so did Black Horse. So just bear that in mind. They knew that from the outset, and so I escalated. And here's what I wrote to the Ombudsman. It was much better formatted than that. This is what happens when you submit it. You just get a PDF copy, and all the formatting's gone. So it's just it looks a little bit condensed and everything else. But I'm going to skip through it. But you've heard what I alleged anyway. So the same day, 16th of February 16, I I send this email to the FCA. The ombudsman's dealing with my mother-in-law's individual complaint, but the dealer told me this was standard. This is how they operate with everybody. So I then made the first of my whistleblower disclosures to the FCA whistleblower team. Now, the PIDA, Public Interest Disclosure Act, establishes that you are, if you're raising concerns about any kind of wrongdoing, breach of law, code, or policy, that counts as a whistleblower disclosure. And a whistleblower is a current or former employee. Now, I was a former employee of Lloyds Banking Group who owned Black Horse, so under PIDA, I was making a whistleblower disclosure. Even if it could be argued, oh, well, technically you weren't a whistleblower, the FCA knew in 2016 who I was. They knew I had 28 years experience working as a trader for many of the world's largest banks. They knew I was FCA authorized and regulated during that time, and they knew I knew my stuff. We had dialogue for a year on my personal whistleblower case. So at the very worst, this was high quality intelligence from somebody who they knew to be highly qualified and an expert in this field, right? So, and I won't go into what the FCA did or didn't do hereafter in too much detail, because we covered that previously, and you can look back at that. So, having escalated to the ombudsman, the ombudsman then denies it. They said, this is the first thing was they denied the complaint on the basis that there was no evidence these Black Horse systems that I've referred to, eQuips and Lets You Connect, existed. So I got the dealer, who I'd mentioned, to send me a screenshot of the login page for Lets You Connect. And so I went back to the ombudsman and went, there you go. And I also sent them a copy of an online industry article from 2006, which announced the launch of these two systems by Black Horse that were going to revolutionize the car finance market. So, okay, put that one to bed. That's nonsense. So then I get this, and it's a bit blurred in the middle there. So this is the second one. They said, I appreciate Mr. C feels it's wrong that the dealer can set the APR, albeit within guidelines set by the lender. However, it's only possible to calculate the total cost of borrowing once all the relevant factors are taken into account, and the lender wouldn't have all these details initially. This was utter nonsense, because all the information that the dealer had, the price of the car, the make of the car, the model of the car, any part exchange, any deposit, the details of the customer, all of that has to go in on the application. So the moment he presses the button, Black Horse know literally everything that the dealer knows. So this is absolute nonsense. And I did a DSAR to the ombudsman. And then this bottom bit here, this is from a letter that the dealer sent to the ombudsman. This is Ashley Moore. Mike Lloyd, who's on this call tonight, he will be familiar with Miss Moore, from her, she at the BBRS, and we know how that organisation operated. So a month before Ashley Moore sends me that conclusion, she's in possession of a letter from the dealer who confirms that when details, the proposal also needs details of the vehicle and detailed description of the type, shape of the file. They literally confirm they have to put all these details in. So Ashley Moore lied to me. She lied. She made a false representation to deny the complaint. The dealer, Black Horse, knew at the point of submission everything that the dealer knew. So I used this, challenged it. And the ombudsman agreed to review it again. This time they came back to me, and it was like, oh my God. They then claimed there was no evidence that the dealer could. They denied the complaint on the basis there's no evidence the dealer could manipulate the APR up or down. And it was like, this time it's like, what the hell? So, right, enough's enough. I mean, it's like they were just making this up as they go along. I mean, so, and the thing is as well, they clearly hadn't asked Black Horse. And why not? And obviously, by this time, we're talking now, it's about August 2016. So the FCA is, and I've copied the FCA on everything. And I'm sending them new stuff, I'm sending them reports and detailing everything. So I'm thinking, okay, right, enough's enough. I'm going to call Black Horse posing as a second-hand car dealer. So, and I had a script prepared. What do I need to say? What do I need to get them to confirm or deny? So, and so I planned, okay, I'm going to pose as a car dealer currently using one of their competitors, and to see if this will encourage them to spill the beans in an effort to get business from a competitor. So, and they didn't disappoint. And I'm going to pay. And what I did the first call, and the guy told me everything and spilled all the beans, confirmed absolutely everything. And then I gave it a little while. I called back again, because anyone who's ever dealt with the Ombudsman and the FCA knows their favourite thing is, oh, it was one person misspeaking, or it was just, it's a one-off, it was a mistake. So I called back shortly after, spoke to a different person at Black Horse New Business Team, and went through the same process, and they confirmed everything as well. So 2 Black Horse employees corroborated everything. So I'm going to play you excerpts from those 2 calls. It's about 3 minutes, but I want this on the record. I want you to hear exactly what Black Horse told me on these calls.
Jim, how can I help?
Oh yeah, hi. I wonder if you can help me. I'm just making some initial inquiries at the moment. I'm in the process of setting up a new used car dealership in Kent. Equips, handles the proposal submitting.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in terms of APR, I mean, does it work in the same way as you set us a band of APR to work within? Is that the okay? We submit the proposal to you. You submit it to the credit rate reference agencies, and that's how you come to your decision, right? So we don't have any involvement in that. Okay, so we have no involvement in that. Okay, that's great. In terms of, are there any rules governing the determination of the APR within the bands that you set? I mean, is it obviously just conscious of subject to status, this kind of thing? I mean, do you give us any indication of where within the bands the APR should be set, or do you leave that entirely to us? Okay, so it's entirely down to us to determine the APR for any given transaction. Okay, and if we do sort of submit a proposal, and I mean, let's say, I don't know, what sort of percentage, how wide are your bands? I mean, we're talking sort of 10% APR bandwidth, or?
It's a lot of variation.
Okay, so 14.9 is the ceiling, yeah?
Yeah. Yourself.
Oh, okay. So, and is it possible to sort of, if the customer gets a bit funny about an APR, is it possible we can go in and if we set it at say 13%, and to close the deal we might need to go to 10? Can we go back and change the APR ourselves? Okay. Okay, great. In terms of how does the APR impact on the commissions? I mean, if we have to really go cut it to the bone to close a deal, I mean, does that affect our commissions in any way? The higher the APR, the greater commissions, and vice versa. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you for calling the Black Horse Business.
Right, and this is the second. So he's confirmed they do all the credit scoring. We can manipulate the APR, whatever, and the higher the APR, the bigger the commissions for us. So this is a it's a much shorter call for the second call I made.
Center. To help us direct your call, please choose from the following options. If you are a dealer, press 1.
Yeah, hi. I wonder if you can help me. I've been speaking with the new business team this morning. Question that I just wanted to clarify: is a general rule of thumb that if we apply a higher APR, there's a higher commission? Oh, okay. And basically we put all the details into Equips, like everything, deposit, value of the car, any part exchange, like literally no stone unturned.
So she confirms everything as well, and confirms as well that we put every detail in. And again, the incentives were there. The higher the APR, the bigger the commission. So that, I send that in to the Ombudsman with the FCA copied as well, with a summary of what these 2 call recordings are showing. And the FOS then says, come back and say, no, they don't believe the new evidence changed anything. They would basically say, no, there's no evidence that there's any incentives. The APR was determined by the credit score obtained from Experian. I mean, absolutely ridiculous. And I said, so you need to explain to me how those call recordings do not change the position, given that the call recordings contradict your decision and contradict everything that Black Horse have said. They wouldn't even confirm if they'd listened to it, and said they don't have to justify anything to me. I mean, it's absolutely extraordinary. So,
Paul, can I come in there? Paul,
yeah.
can I come in just very quickly? If you didn't hear the responses from the person or the people that Paul was speaking to, I warrant that they are in line with what Paul has indicated they say, because you can't hear it that clearly. But I've heard those, the original recordings, and they do reply exactly as Paul is outlining. It is absolutely clear, it is unequivocal what they're saying, and the significance of what they're saying is precisely in line with what Paul has just said. Thank you, Paul. Carroll.
And clips of those, one of those calls made it into the BBC documentary the other week. Now, what's important here is that during the production of that BBC Radio 4 documentary, the BBC had to give the right to reply to all the parties involved. And during that process, Black Horse and Lloyds claimed to be unaware of any of these recordings. So asked the BBC for a copy of the transcript. But the BBC obviously had to ask me for permission. And I said, yeah, fire away. And it's now been confirmed that Foss never approached Black Horse with that smoking gun recording, and never demanded that Black Horse explain why the representations made to me in the complaint response and by the Ombudsman were never challenged. They never challenged Black Horse to demand, say, well, hang on, what you told Mr. Carley on the recordings is entirely contradicts what you said to him and to us in the complaint response. So, I mean, it's extraordinary. They literally buried the evidence and lied to me so as to deny the complaint in 2016. They did lie. They made false representations, because surely you take that evidence and you challenge Black Horse. What could Black Horse have said? Oh no, both of those people were lying? The car dealer was lying? No, it would have changed everything. But they buried it. But new evidence that I now have proves that there was an altogether more disturbing version of events. And when I say more disturbing, yes, I do mean more disturbing than the Ombudsman lying to me. So, and I've got further evidence in addition to that as well. So, and in January 2017, and you might have seen from the other presentation I did, I escalated all this stuff to the FCA, and they were burying it as well. And it was only in January 17 when I got a DSAR response from the FCA claiming that I hadn't sent in any evidence, which is absolute nonsense. So I called the FCA in February 17, this team, and said, right, I've got this email. You claim I didn't send anything. This is nonsense. So while I'm on the phone to you, I'm going to send you each of the emails again with all of the evidence and recordings and everything else. And you're going to confirm over the phone that you've received them and you're going to do something, or at least look at them. They did confirm they've got them all. And then 2 months later, the FCA confirmed the launch of their investigation into car finance that commenced in April 17 and concluded in March 2019. So, but in the meantime, I'm sitting there, okay, well, how do I get, I've exhausted the process of my mother-in-law's complaint, but whilst my wife got a better APR of 8.9%, obviously that was still missold, because we know she could have got 3.9%. So, okay, here's what we'll do. We'll make a new complaint to Black Horse and see if they do the same, or so that, again, if they do lie, it's not a one-off. So I make exactly the same complaint on behalf of my wife in February 2018 with all of the same allegations. And sure enough, Black Horse come back and they make all of the same representations denying the complaint. So her APR was determined by a credit score obtained from Experian, and all this other stuff. The car dealer sets it, but within strict parameters that we set, implying that the narrow parameters. But again, it was all about credit score and all about credit. It's an absolute lie, an absolute lie. So, and they also said that you accepted it, so that's it. You were happy with it. No, because it was only accepted because that was the only rate that was on offer. So again, it's like, these lenders were saying, well, because you accepted it on the basis of all the non-disclosure and all the stuff we concealed, then you're bound by it. No, and obviously the Supreme Court is currently opining on whether or not the disclosure, non-disclosure had any influence. Well, it did. It wasn't just the incentivised commission arrangements, because without disclosure of this and the incentive, then obviously you don't know that you're getting a fair or competitive rate. And I don't know if you saw recently, Charlie Nunn was before the Treasury Select Committee, and obviously I've debunked this whole nonsense about the dealer. The dealer had to take into account all these other things. Absolute nonsense. Now, before the Treasury Select Committee, Charlie Nunn started coming out with all this verbiage. Oh, but obviously the dealer, you know, he has to look at all the other things and all the add-ons, and as though that's got any relevance to car finance. It hasn't. You know, the only thing that's relevant is how much you're financing, and you're not financing the, you know, the, I don't know, car mats, or you're not financing the warranty, all these other add-ons. That's all part and parcel of the deal. And at the point of sale, Charlie Nunn was trying to say, again, that, Black Horse weren't aware, only the dealer is. That's why the dealer was best positioned. Absolute nonsense. But he was still regurgitating this nonsense this year before the Treasury Select Committee. So obviously they've Black Horse tonight again. So again, I now get a chance to escalate to the Ombudsman, and now we're going to put the Ombudsman to the test with all the new evidence. And from the start this time, I gave them everything. So, you know, I wasn't on the back foot where I'd exhausted the process by the time it got to the point where I gave the FCA, the Ombudsman, the new recording. So, and in October 18, and this is really important, the adjudicator of the Ombudsman confirmed that she now had everything she needed from us and from Black Horse to make her decision, or to review the case and make her decision. Importantly, she confirmed to me that everything that Black Horse had told me in the complaint response, they had also told the Ombudsman. So they had made the same false representations that they made to me to the Ombudsman when I escalated the complaint. This is really important, as you'll find out going forward. So 4th of March 2019, the FCA published their final notice following their 2-year investigation. As mentioned, it mentions that they call them discretionary commission arrangements because it sounds better than incentivised commission arrangements. They mention that these existed, but they don't mention any names. They don't mention Black Horse, even though I'd given them chapter and verse on this. And they then say that they're going to ban these practices from January 21. And in so doing, they implied that there was nothing wrong with these practices. They certainly, you know, banning them in 2021, like, that's nonsense. Like, they, you know, these were already a breach of law, a blatant breach of law, and it had been corroborated by Plevin, the Paragon PPI judgment. So it was nonsense. And not to mention that the breaches of FCA codes that all of this represented, they weren't acting with honesty and integrity. The communications with customers were not fair, clear, and not misleading. And they'd lied to us in the complaint response. And the FCA knew all of this. So it was utterly dishonestly limited, that final notice. But after the FCA announced the final notice, and obviously whilst it was dishonestly limited, it did include enough information to confirm that these practices did exist, right? And that the dealer was incentivized. So I then went to the Ombudsman and said, right, as a result of this, you've got to reinvestigate my mother-in-law's complaint from 2016. So Annette Lovell, who was a senior Ombudsman manager and parliamentary liaison, she reported direct to then CEO Caroline Wayman. She told me that she had asked senior Ombudsman Mark Hollands to look into this. And 2 weeks later, Mark Hollands called me to say that, astonishingly, he did not consider the FCA final notice following a 2-year investigation sufficient new evidence to reopen that complaint. Even though the information in there, as limited as it was, did confirm or did contradict the Foss's decision on my mother-in-law's case and contradicted what Black Horse had been saying. So immediately, I made a formal complaint to Annette Lovell that Holland's positions were dishonest and the result of conflicts of interest. I made a formal complaint. She writes to me assuring that this complaint was being taken very seriously and that Simon Rule, a senior ombudsman, had been tasked with investigating this matter and would respond within a few weeks. I will return to this later because it's shocking. So, but also in March 2019, I had revealed to Hollands when I was challenging him and saying this is ridiculous. But during the conversations, I had revealed to him that, okay, I think I said something along the lines of, all right, fine. Well, let's see how you deal with the other complaint that I've got in train right now. Let's see you try and deny that one. So having told him that, well, I'll come back to that again in a minute. In the meantime, we fast forward to August 2019 and the adjudicator denies the complaint that I'd escalated to my wife. Now, but what she'd done in I think it was on the previous slide, where in May 2019, having told us in October 2018 that she had all she needed, in May 2019, she said to me, oh, I need to go back to Black Horse to get some further information. I'm going, and I said, well, but you told us you had everything. So, no, but I need some more information. So fast forward to August 2019, she denies the complaint, and on the basis that Black Horse have now changed their story. Black Horse now told her that, oh, actually, it wasn't the car dealer that set the APR on that agreement, it was us. Therefore, bang, no, there was no incentives, right? There could be no incentives because it was Black Horse that set the APR. Now, that was clearly a blatant lie, because the dealer that set the APR was the dealer that spilled all the beans to me. And he freely admitted and showed me how he'd done it, right? So that was a lie. But what was worse is that, well, that's not additional information. You've just simply gone to them and got a different story. Like, that's not new information. You've just got a different story, and a story that contradicts what Black Horse told us and contradicts what they told you. So I said, well, so they're either lying now or they lied to us before. Either way, what are you going to do? And they refused to do anything, right? But they clearly had. They'd lied at some point. I knew they were lying now, but I mean, literally, what can you do? So I submitted a DSAR, a data subject access request. So now originally the FOSS data team guy, after 30 days, said, oh, I'm now classifying this as complex, so I need an extra 2 months in which to process it, which they could do under law. I replied immediately and said, no. This is a relatively short period of time, because I already had a DSAR previously, and I'd only told them to go back a year. I said, this is a bog standard DSAR response. So, you know, and I said, I'm already got evidence of potential fraud here by the Ombudsman. Do you really want to implicate yourself as well by way of fraud by failing to disclose information you've got a legal obligation to disclose? And within an hour, he came back to me and went, I've reconsidered, here's everything. And he gave me volumes of stuff. Now, it is all my personal information to which I was entitled. However, if anyone's had a DSAR response from the Ombudsman or the FCA, you will know, or any big firm for that matter these days, you will know they will take out all the smoking gun material. So there's stuff in this DSAR response that I was never going to get and would not have got, but for him panicking and just going, there you go. So, and honestly, I'm reading these reams of pages, and it's extraordinary. So, but the most extraordinary thing was this. Well, I say the most extraordinary. The first extraordinary thing was this. In the log for my wife's complaint is this. 28th of February 2019, the adjudicator upheld the complaint. She upheld it. It says it, the business did something, or must do something to put it correct. So days before the FCA published their final notice, she upheld our complaint. And I'm gobsmacked. Well, hang on, how the hell? And of course she should have done, because I gave her all this evidence. So of course she did. On the merits and the evidence of the case, she had no choice but to uphold it, and she did. But hang on, how the hell did 6 months later, does she end up denying it? So, and here, this is where it starts to get, is corruption the right word? I don't know, you be the judge, because I don't know how best to describe this. On the 5th of April, Mark Hollands, after I've revealed to him the existence of this other complaint, he writes to this, what is a stakeholder group within the Ombudsman. And he's saying, I just called to update you all. I've spoken with Carlier again. I explained that I had nothing further to add several times and that I wasn't prepared to go through details of the case with him again. And then he says, this is something to bear in mind for what's to come. After he started to insult my professionalism and integrity, I explained that I could see no further benefit in continuing the call and wasn't prepared to sit and listen to him insult me, so ended the call. Now, there's other emails in here where all of this stakeholder group are going, oh, Mark, that's outrageous. You should not have to endure allegations of dishonesty like that. It's extraordinary. But at the bottom here, he reveals to this group, one thing he mentioned was that he raised a similar complaint about car finance, and he's confirmed that he's now hunted it down, found the complaint for my wife, again, Black Horse, and then says this case will be caught by the red flag and any correspondence will be highlighted to the stakeholder team before being issued. So he was saying that this red flag that's on the system meant that no correspondence would come to me before it gets directed to this stakeholder group at the Ombudsman. Now, I'm thinking, what the hell? Is this red flag for me or whatever? And now, on the same day, the 5th of April, Lee Betts of the Ombudsman replies to Holland's email, right? And again, you'll see in here that, he said, thanks for letting us know. I'm sorry you had to put up with that kind of behaviour. Let's see what Mr. C does next and take a view whether we need to do something from Caroline Wayman, CEO, because all this cabal of senior managers reported direct to her, on her behalf to draw a line and make it clear that some of his conduct is unacceptable. I've accused him of being dishonest and being utterly conflicted, right? So he says, I'm not back in the office now, but it might help if you let the case handler of my wife's complaint know about the history and context of our dealing with Mr. Carlier if you haven't done so already, right? So does Hollands come back and say, of course I can't interfere with the case? No. He says, I have spoken with the case handler already on the case, and I'll share anything you need to know on that as it progresses. Any views will be shared before they're sent. So he's already confirmed that he's got involved. Now, we have emails from the Ombudsman that were submitted by a journalist specific to how is it permitted for managers at the Ombudsman to interfere with the investigation of a complaint. Utterly prohibited. No, every case must be assessed on its individual merits. There can be no interference from management. Not according to this lot. This mob are interfering and putting pressure on the adjudicator. So, and then on 10th of April, Lee Betts writes back, to Annette Lovell and others, and said there's a bit of background. It might help to have a quick conversation about tomorrow. And he's telling this other group that in my conversation, I'd alerted Hollands about this other case. And he confirms that Hollands has flagged this with the relevant casework team. And he confirms I've spoken to the investigator overseeing the cases to provide context and ensure we keep things joined up. I mean, it's just unashamed. They're literally interfering with this case. Now, obviously, she upheld the complaint on the 28th of February, but she is being put under enormous intimidation from this cabal of FOSS senior managers. So, and in August 2019, of course, she produces this decision to reverse the complaint. I don't blame her because the adjudicators aren't ombudsman, they're fairly junior, but she upheld our complaint and that was it. That's binding. As soon as she upholds it, that's binding. But it was then subject to this red flag. It was captured. And then she is put under enormous pressure from a group of who she knows to be senior managers at the FOSS, all of whom report to Caroline Wayman. I think it's fair to say that any junior employee would find it hard, if not impossible, to resist that pressure and intimidation, right? I mean, you would do. You're a junior employee. You're starting out in your career. Are you going to push back against that? We all know what happens to whistleblowers. I know firsthand exactly what happens. But what's disturbing here is that, like, when she goes back to Black Horse in May 2019, there had to have been collusion with Black Horse and her, right? Because she didn't ask for new information. She's literally and Black Horse simply gave her a new narrative that she wanted and needed to be able to justify denying the complaint. So Black Horse knew this was collusion between the Black Horse and the Ombudsman, and it's astonishing. So before moving on to what happened next, the more recent developments, I want to remind you of the complaint that I made to Annette Lovell of the FOSS in April 2019 about Mark Hollands alleging his dishonesty and conflict of interest after claiming the final notice by the FCA wasn't sufficient to reopen the complaint of my mother-in-law. So on the 1st of May, in response to that complaint, Annette Lovell sends me this. Dear Ms. Carlier, thank you for your recent emails to me and your colleague, yada, yada, yada. It's disappointing that you have gone as far as to suggest this. I have partial recent concerns about Ombudsman Mark Hollands to our Ombudsman leader, Simon Rule, who is Mark's line manager. Simon will be in touch with you directly within 15 working days with our response to your complaint. She sends this to me on the 1st of May, and she copies this Lee Betts in on it. Now, I hadn't come across Lee Betts before, right? And obviously the first time I see him is on this email on the 1st of May. So Annette Lovell sends this to me on the 1st of May. Right, 21st of May, I get this email from Louise Lee Hurst with Simon Rule copied and Lee Betts copied. And she confirms Further to my colleagues, please find attached their senior manager response to your concerns about Mark Hollins. And it's signed, it's this 1.5 page, it's signed by Simon Rule, the Ombudsman leader. And he denies everything, denies Mark's dishonest, denies that he's got any conflicts. So again, let's go back to that. Now, the indignant nature of their responses, how dare he would call you dishonest and conflicted? Like, you know, oh, you should never have had to endure that, right? I mean, this is astonishing, because this email here is dated the 26th of April, after I've made my complaint, right? So, and this is from Lee Betts to this, to Simon or Mark Hollins. So he says, he reiterates what I've said, right? I hereby allege that the FOSS and its decision made by Mark Hollins on its behalf is knowingly false and was made so as to cover up FOSS failings and further conflicts of interest, etc. So Betts is frustrated. Without addressing this first, it is difficult to draw a line, not least because I've asked them to investigate this allegation. Once we've done that, Annette can say that she or anyone else won't be corresponding. So they want to draw a line under it. But then he says this. So we think it might help to treat as a straightforward service complaint and for Simon to handle this in the usual way, right? I assume your response will end up being rather brief, saying we're satisfied that Mark does not have a conflict of interest and he handled matters as we would expect. He's literally predetermining the outcome. He's saying, yeah, so basically, Simon, do your usual thing. And obviously your response will just deny everything, right? So, and then he writes, I'll suggest Annette sends something along the lines of the draft below. And sure enough, below, it's almost word for word what Annette Lovell then sends me 5 days later on the 1st of May. Now, that's what they're saying there. Oh, we take these complaints seriously. I've tasked Simon Rule with investigating your complaint. He'll be in touch soon. That's drafted in the same email where they've already made the predetermined outcome. They get Simon, just do your usual thing and deny everything. I mean, and no shame. This is a complaint about the Ombudsman being dishonest and conflicted, and that they're all up in arms that I've dared to make it. And here, he's drafting, they're literally lying to me. We will investigate this and we take it seriously, when they were going to do nothing of the sort. And indeed, so what happens is, as soon as Annette Lovell sends the email to me on the 1st of May with Betts copied, right, Lee Betts immediately forwards it on to Mark Hollins and Simon Rule and says, right, both, for your info, Simon, over to you for the service complaint, because Annette Lovell's done the first step. She sent me that bogus draft, assuring me they're going to investigate, forwards it on to Simon Rule to do his thing. You know, the thing, predetermined outcome, just deny everything. So Simon Rule then forwards it on to Louise Lee Hurst, her name's redacted here, and the girl that sends me supposedly the complaint response from him, right? So he says, something else for your to-do list, sorry. Can you liaise with Mark to draft a response for me? Mark Hollins. Can you liaise with Mark Hollins to produce or draft a response to me in response to my complaint about Mark Hollins? So, and I'm going through this file, what the hell? And sure enough, she then sends, a few days later, she sends a draft of a response to Mark Hollins and says to him, can you have a look, Mark, and check it over and make any amendments? And they left, and the attachment's there that he sends back to her on the 20th of May. The attachment's there with all the track changes. So these bits highlighted here, Mark Hollins made these amendments. So, and when he's finished, the response he sends back to Louise Lee Hurst is exactly the document I get the following day, purporting to be the result of an independent investigation by Simon Rule into these allegations against Mark Hollins. When in actual fact, Rule didn't lift a finger. Of course he didn't, because he'd already been told it's predetermined out and just deny everything. The complaint response I received in response to my complaint about Mark Hollins' dishonesty and conflicts was produced by Mark bloody Hollins. I mean, seriously, I mean, and again, they're all indignant about me daring to accuse them of being dishonest.
Paul,
I mean,
can I come in there? Paul, can I just come in there for a second? In my opinion, if the only thing that's happened in this whole scandal is what callers have spent the last 5 minutes explaining, then somebody somewhere should be in a lot of trouble, shouldn't they? The system's not meant to work like this. The system's meant to be properly governed. There's meant to be checks and balances, and honesty and transparency and accountability, it looks to me like the system here has just been completely gamed, doesn't it? Back to you, Paul. Thank you very much.
And what's worse, and I haven't put it in here, but I made a formal complaint to Caroline Wayman, and she replied saying, I can't see anything wrong. I'd got this smoking gun material, and she said nothing wrong. I then went to the independent assessor of the Ombudsman, you can say, and she also didn't see anything wrong. The independent assessor, who was Amadeep Samal, who many of you might know, got promoted after that to become the complaints commissioner, who would then oversee complaints about the Financial Conduct Authority. So, and she saw nothing wrong with any of this. I sent them all of these emails, nothing wrong. I mean, it's just extraordinary. But the thing is, once you've exhausted that process, where can you go? Where can you go? Well, I went to, and I haven't included it in here, but I escalated it to Andrew Bailey's office. And Toby Hall of Andrew Bailey's office said, oh yeah, he would pass this on to the relevant department of the FCA that deals with it. Buried. Of course they did, because you're going to see in the coming slides just why the FCA buried this as much as they did everything else. So now I want to jump forward to last week and the Mansion House speech. Now, and I want to go back. Do you remember when I said about the red flag that Mark Hollands revealed in this email? It will be captured by the red flag, and therefore all these complaints will be diverted to us. Now, this has had real significance in light of recent events, especially Rachel Reeves' Mansion House speech. Now, just before the Mansion House speech, UK Finance, who many of you know is the trade body of all the banks and most lenders, right, produced this document, and it was that they were proudly boasting about the engagement with Treasury and the lobbying they had done with Rachel Reeves and the Treasury to reform the Ombudsman. And in it is this extraordinary, it's a lie, basically. So they're trying to refocus the regulatory system. So we have therefore greatly welcomed the attention from the government on reforming the Financial Ombudsman Service and the need to address the fact that the decisions go beyond FCA rules and create legal uncertainty, and see the Ombudsman acting as a quasi-regulator. Hang on. So basically what they're doing here, they're referring to the two decisions by the Ombudsman last year to uphold the complaints against Black Horse and Barclays, specific to the incentivised commission arrangements, right? They deemed that they were unlawful, breach of the Consumer Credit Act, corroborated by Plevin, and that the two victims should be to get redress equal to the difference between the interest they paid and the interest they would have got had the lender put it through at the lowest APR in those bands, exactly as I had been saying years earlier. Now, UK Finance lied to the Treasury, because basically they're saying that the FCA, the Ombudsman made these decisions that went against the FCA, and they're acting as a quasi-regulator. And they confirmed that this was successful. This convinced Treasury and Rachel Reeves to amend the system and reform it on that basis, to take away powers from the Ombudsman, right? So, but what I've got here is evidence to prove that UK Finance and the lenders themselves made false representations to Treasury and Rachel Reeves. Now, again, this is the email that Mark Hollands revealed at the bottom. This case will be caught by the red flag, and any correspondence will be highlighted to the stakeholder team. As mentioned before, I wasn't sure if is it just my complaints that's this red flag? Oh no. Right. So in 2019, I had a call with the adjudicator and who denied our complaint. So and who had upheld it in February 2019. Right. So when I raised the term red flag, I said, and she's a bit panicked. So she said, but then she says this, and this is word for word from the transcript of the call that I recorded. Right. So she says the red flag, it's not this complaint. Right. So she goes on to say, the red flag is specific to all complaints of that nature, i.e. the incentivised commission arrangements. So she said, I don't want to discuss too much internal information, but what I can tell you confidently is that any complaints that we get from consumers mentioning now they're unhappy because they believe the finance companies allowed dealers to set the IPR and the agreements. These kind of cases is the red flag. So these kind of complaints, so before we can send anything to consumers, it gets reviewed, right? So she's confirming that the red flag is specific to all of these complaints of this nature. And she's confirming, essentially, there's a predetermined outcome. It's been decided that all of these complaints are going to be denied, right? So now, fast forward to this year, April this year, another employee who I met when I went to the Ombudsman HQ, and she was very empathetic, very sympathetic to the journey that I'd had and everything else. And she then says, oh, a couple of things you've touched on. The FCA is our authority, so we can't go above the FCA. They quite literally set out the rules, what we can look into, what we can't look into, and what is the right answer on this, and what are their expectations in terms of that business, right? So we follow that, right? And then she says, and then she explains, with the practice with the red and yellow flag has been involved, this is a very standard process. We have to make sure as a company we are consistent. So at that time, in 2016 and 2019, the FCA was saying that commissions weren't paid for this or paid this way. We were following that. So she confirms in 2016 and 2019, they're taking directions from the FCA on this. So she said it's unlikely we were doing anything wrong because we were following our regulator. I understand how the regulator now has changed their view on commission altogether, and our decisions are changing on commission as well. So she's also confirming that the FOS didn't make those decisions in January 2019 to uphold the complaint. The FCA told them to, just as I'd alleged earlier in this presentation, because the FCA needed to kill our class action to basically conceal all the information that was going to come out and prove the fraud the FCA committed in 2019. And obviously the role of the Ombudsman in that fraud by unlawfully denying all of these complaints. She confirms that the FOS made those decisions. The FCA told the FOS to uphold those two complaints. It wasn't the other way around. And yet UK Finance leveraged those two decisions, claiming, oh, this is the evidence that the FOS is acting as a quasi-regulator to take further powers away from the Ombudsman. And UK Finance know that basically the Ombudsman is a puppet to the FCA and that the FCA is a puppet to the firms, right? They all know that. But what's worse is that, so all of this is confirmed, and I'll leave this summary up here, right? A red flag is a predetermined outcome for all cases of a specific nature. In this case, specific to incentivised commission arrangements. That red flag is a result of directions, guidance, or orders from the FCA to the Ombudsman. That in 2016 and 2019, it was the FCA that directed or ordered the FOS to deny my two complaints specific to incentivised commission arrangements. That in 2019, it was the FCA that directed and ordered the FOS to deny all complaints specific to incentivised commission arrangements. And it was the FCA that directed and ordered the FOS to uphold the two complaints against Barclays and Black Horse that were upheld in January last year, right? So, and UK Finance would have known that, right? Everybody knows that if you're aware of what really goes on. So they lied to Treasury and Rachel Reeves and got these reforms in which take further powers away from the FOS. Now, what's perhaps worse is that the FCA and the FOS didn't say anything. And Baroness Mansour, who is so anti-consumer, when you hear her talk, and she was grilled by the Treasury Select Committee in February, she's the chair of the Ombudsman. Everything she seems to do is focused on anti-consumer on the side of the firms. Well, why did she not speak up and say, no, you got that wrong. We had to bow to the FCA, right? So but let's not forget that the firms, their trade body, have managed to get the FOS powers reduced even further to the detriment of consumers as a result of decades of unlawful, if not criminal conduct by their members in respect to car finance, and though conduct that's now established and that will see billions of pounds in redress for millions of consumers. On what planet do the guilty win reforms and benefits due to the scale of their wrongdoing and not vice versa? I mean, seriously, how is this possible, and how is nobody speaking up? And let's look at this as well. In February this year, and Andy will be aware of this as well, Dame Siobhan McDonald, Treasury Select Committee, says to ask this question of the FCA board and the CEO and chair. Lastly, did the FCA at any time since 2016 put pressure on your service or indicate or direct you as to how it wanted you to deal with unlawful incentivised commission arrangements? James Nipple Johnson, the CEO, says no. unequivocally. Baroness Mansour doesn't say a dicky bird. She doesn't say a word. Now, either James Dipple Johnston lied to the Treasury Select Committee, or those two of FOSS employees lied to me. What do you think is more plausible? Right? I know what's more plausible. James Dipple Johnston lied to the Treasury Select Committee. So now I need to be very clear about this. There absolutely should be such an arrangement through which the FCA can say, right, particularly contentious issue that affects a lot of people, our conclusion and our decision on this is this. And therefore the FOSS is going to be required to act in accordance with that position that we've established. And this is what happened in 2009. Obviously, Andy's already revealed that it took ages for the FSA to act in terms of PPI. But when they did in 2009, they went public and said, right, enough's enough. This has all been missold, and the firms are mishandling complaints. So from this point on, these complaints will be upheld, and the FOSS will uphold all these complaints. Yeah, that's the way it should work. So why did they not make public the red flag predetermined outcome that forced the FOSS to deny all complaints specific to car finance incentivised commission arrangements? The simple truth is because the FCA knew that this predetermined outcome was unlawful. They knew it was dishonest. The FCA knew these arrangements were a breach of long-standing law, the Consumer Credit Act, and various regulatory codes and guidance, but produced what they knew to be a dishonestly limited notice in March 2019 to protect the guilty firms and deprive millions of consumers of the billions of pounds in redress that they knew consumers were owed. And let's not forget, their notice didn't name any firm, didn't reveal the evidence I gave them, let alone whatever they themselves discovered. But obviously, producing a dishonestly limited final notice isn't enough. The FOSS to bury it and protect the firms and deprive consumers of redress. The FCA needed the FOSS to deny these complaints to keep consistent with that protection of firms and the consumer detriments that the FCA wanted. So now, did the FCA know in 2016 and 2019, and until January 24, when they were directing the FOSS to deny all these complaints, that I was absolutely right in 2016 and 2019 that these incentivised commission arrangements were unlawful? Did the FCA know this? Yes, they did. But don't take my word for it. The FCA themselves admitted it and did so under oath in court in 2024. Albeit, this next document has never been published by the FCA. I got it from the court and a journalist who was in attendance. Right? Now, don't get me wrong, it's a tour de force document. Hats off to the FCA and their barristers who produced this. Right? As you know, Barclays appealed the Ombudsman decision via an application for judicial review in the High Court. The FCA intervened and they wrote this detailed grounds document in support of the Ombudsman's decisions. And it really is a tour de force. And they submitted this to the court in 27th of August last year. Again, it's not public anywhere. And I'm certain the reasons are because it exposes what they did previously, right? So in this document that they submitted to the High Court in support of the decisions, because Barclays had challenged on the basis that, hang on, you only banned these in 2021. You made new laws in 2021. So this agreement that was sold in 2017 can't be subject to these new laws. However, the FCA in this amazing document say that's utter nonsense. This was not the introduction of a new rule. We had to ban these incentivized commission agreements because, as further guidance and clarity, because all of you firms were so ritually breaching the long-standing law and codes that were in place. And then they go on to establish there was long-standing law, Consumer Credit Act, and various regulatory codes and multiple papers of guidance dating back to at least 2007, all of which confirmed that this was unlawful. And they referred to Plevin, the Supreme Court judgment on PPI, confirming that Plevin was unequivocal. And it applies here. That corroborates what we're saying, that this was unlawful, breach of long-standing law and code, because a financial product cannot be sold and priced on a whatever you can get away with basis in the interest of greater profits for you, right? And I think one of the terms was on whatever you think the customer might be prepared to pay, the same kind of wording, right? So, oh my God, here's the FCA confirming I was right. I was right in 2016 and 2019, because if it was a breach of long-standing law and code dating back to 2007 in 2024, it was clearly a breach of long-standing law and code in 2016 and 2019, if it dated back to 2007. So, I mean, it's extraordinary. So why did they produce the predetermined outcomes in 2016 and 2019 and that dishonesty limited final notice in 2019 that doesn't say that? Why did they not say that in 2019? Because they wanted to protect the firms and deprive consumers of redress, pure and simple. So on the basis of that new document, right, detailed grounds document in the High Court, right, on 31st of December, I submit a new complaint. It's a tripartite complaint. I address it to the CEO and chair of Lloyds Bank, Charlie Nunn and Robin Buddenberg, the CEO and chair of the FCA, the CEO and the board of the Ombudsman, and specifically Abby Thomas, right? So, and I'm raising a new complaint specific to the two car finance complaints here of my two family members. And I allege that this is basically, it's in respect to these two complaints and the conduct of these three parties, both individually, a dishonesty and concealment that was undertaken both individually by Black Horse, the FCA and the Ombudsman, and also by way of unlawful and dishonest collusion between two or more of those parties at various times. Because I've got it. That detailed grounds document by the FCA proves I was right, proves everything I've said and alleged was correct. And obviously I've now got the evidence to prove that this red flag existed, that pressure was put on the Ombudsman to deny the complaints, that the Ombudsman Act literally reversed our complaint. Now it goes on for 18 pages and I detail everything that I've got, and it's probably one of the better complaints I've ever written. Now, on the 19th of March this year, Black Horse, well, it comes from Charlie Nunn's office, the Group Executive Complaints team, right? So Charlie Nunn's office sent me 2 emails, and attached to each email is a response specific to the two complaints, each of the complaints on my behalf of my two family members. As you can see there. So there's the letters that were attached. And here we go. In both cases, the first one on the left, that's my mother-in-law's. Based on my initial checks, I found that this finance agreement involved a discretionary commission arrangement. And the one on the right here, based on my initial checks, I found that my wife's finance agreement involved a discretionary commission arrangement. It's a confession, right? They confessed to mis-selling these two car finance agreements, right? They're now confessing that they were mis-sold subject to an unlawful incentivized commission arrangement. But it's also confessing, therefore, to also making repeated false representations to me in response to my complaint about the sale of this FCA regulated product and during an FCA regulated complaints process, right? And they also confess, therefore, to having made false representations to the Ombudsman after each of the complaints were escalated to the FOSS. So they're essentially also confessing to multiple counts of fraud. Fraud by false representation, fraud by abuse of position, fraud by failing to disclose information. During which time, and we're talking 13 years from that first complaint, they caused enormous distress and inconvenience. But look at this bit down the bottom there. They say, oh, however, you've made, and this is in both cases, however, you've made previous complaints to Black Horse in relation to these agreements, which have covered the complaints I've summarised above. Those complaints were all investigated and a final response sent. As a result, I'm unable to reconsider these complaint decisions. No. My complaint is not about the original mis-selling. It was also specific to the false representations made in their handling of these complaints. They've literally said, no, we're not going to look at that. And basically, we're just going to park it so that they'll just get the redress that everybody else is getting. I mean, honestly, if I was to go into Lloyd's tomorrow, grab 5 grand out of a till, do a runner, I get caught 3 months later, can I go up, here, have your 5 grand back, and then just go on my way? Of course not.
No.
Of course not. There has to be. Yep.
Paul, at some point, could you squeeze into the conversation what you said to the board of Lloyd's at the AGM last year and what happened about that as well, please, if you get a chance.
Provisions.
Yeah.
So I will do. I'll get to that at the end. So basically, they're refusing to investigate anything. They're just parking these 2 complaints under the redress. They're just going to get the standard redress that's coming. No. And I've made a formal complaint to Lloyd. No, I'm sorry, but you put my mother-in-law through hell for years. And not only did they mis-sell and cost her 4.5 grand, right? This was bought in 2011. in 2019, when she was unable to drive any longer, we went to sell the car for her. It was worth £10,000. And the RAC vehicle checks were saying no finance outstanding. However, when we took it to a dealer, they said, oh, there's finance outstanding. We go, hang on, there can't be. This was 8 years ago. Like this, there cannot be finance outstanding. We spoke with Black Horse and they were, yeah, there's finance outstanding. Boy, there can't be. You're telling Experian, who published the RAC vehicle checks, there's no finance on this vehicle. Yeah, well, unlucky. And the arrogance and contempt that they showed is a perfect demonstration of what happens when they know the Ombudsman and the FCA's got your back. We're just going to screw you. We're going to treat you with utter contempt. Right now, she was prevented from selling that car for 4 years before, you know, we eventually forced them to remove it. By which time it had dropped £7,000 in value. So, you know, and obviously by that time, this was 11 years after the mis-selling, and they knew all along she was a cancer-suffering pensioner. Right, just bear that in mind. They took pleasure in causing further distress. Right, so if Lloyds think they're going to get away with that, think again. But so what I also did, as soon as I got these letters, I forwarded them to the Ombudsman. But by this time, the Ombudsman hadn't responded. But I want you to bring this to your attention, right? This is February this year, right? This is testimony from James Dibble Johnson, the CEO, and Baroness Mansour, right? So Baroness Mansour particularly. Now, can't stand the woman, right? She is so anti-consumer, it's ridiculous. Now, and one thing I want to say here as well, you're aware that the Ombudsman is now bringing in this levy on claims management companies to further diminish the opportunities we have for getting a complaint upheld, because, you know, the Ombudsman is utterly corrupted, dishonest. Are you an individual going to get a fair hearing? You've seen what I've been through. So what chance does an ordinary consumer have? So often a law firm or a CMC, claims management company, is your only option. They're now introducing a levy. So it's going to cost these, you know, and they're using the volume of complaints. Mansour referred to the volume of complaints as a reason to justify this levy. A volume of complaints that wouldn't exist had the Ombudsman not acted honestly in 2016 and again in 2019. So it's extraordinary. They're using their own corruption and their own incompetence and their own subservience to the FCA that has created this wave of complaints as a reason to further undermine consumer detriment. She knows that, right? But what's really important about this is that she pipes in here. That is an important point, because we do have consumers who come in again and again because they think that you have not listened to them when the investigations have been fair and reasonable, and they just do not like the outcome. Now, she, I think, was having a dig at me because Siobhan McDonough earlier in this session had brought up my complaints that I've made, right? So I'm certain she's tarnishing me with this. This is me. Oh, I just wasn't happy with the outcomes, right? That I came in again, and I did. Not because I was unhappy with the outcome, but also because I knew the outcome was utterly dishonest. She then says, my view is that unless you have new evidence or the Ombudsman Service has got something totally factually wrong, it is a part of natural justice that you go to the Ombudsman. At the moment, the issue is that every consumer has the right to go to the Ombudsman, even though they've gone through the first stage. The overturn rate of the second stage is so nominal, right? So we do have a very comprehensive system in place that checks after we've undertaken a case. Perhaps James Dibble Johnson could say a few words. And he says, we do have a peer review process, but we are never infallible. So it's always there as something that we are mindful of. We want to get the right answers for people. So Mansour says that, you know, if you've got new evidence, they will have to look at their own performance and look at these own decisions. But by March the 18th, after I get these confessions from Lloyds and I've sent them on to the Ombudsman, saying, well, what are you going to do now? Come on, you know, I'm still waiting for you to acknowledge the complaint I sent to Abby Thomas in December, right? You're not even acknowledged it and confirmed you're going to investigate it. So I spoke to somebody at the Ombudsman. They assured me they would get back to me and acknowledge the complaint response. I know Abby Thomas received it because I got her out of office reply in December, right? So, and she'd come back to me on her return, the automated office reply. But I know it got through. I know she received it. So, but still nothing was forthcoming. So on 5th of April, I say to the, I'll come to that. I say, right, unless I've got an acknowledgement from the Ombudsman by 5 p.m. Tuesday, I'm going to have no choice but to come to the Ombudsman HQ with a physical copy of the complaint, right, and hand it in and get somebody to sign and acknowledge it. So 5 p.m. Tuesday comes around, nothing from the Ombudsman. So Wednesday morning, I go to the Ombudsman HQ, right now, and I know I'm entering the lion's den, and I know from bitter experience, because the FCA tried this with me once before, they created false narratives as to what I did and said and my conduct when I arrived there. Now, but I took precautions to make sure, you know, that I was protected. And I could not have been more respectful and professional to the people in the reception. And eventually, when I asked to speak to James Dipple Johnston, the reception said to me, oh, he's taken the day off and working from home today. He knew I was coming in and took the day off to avoid meeting with me. He knew I was coming in to present him with this thing. I said, well, I need to speak to somebody because I've got this complaint here. And obviously, statutory obligations and duties of the Ombudsman, you have to investigate complaints. That's your role. So I've got this complaint that you're refusing to acknowledge by email. So I've got no choice but to come here in person and have somebody sign for and acknowledge it. So they went away, came back and said, I'm sorry, Mr. Colley, nobody from the CEO's office will come down and meet with you. I mean, it's extraordinary. You know? I'm sitting in reception. So I said, well, I can't leave until I've got someone to sign for this. This is what the Ombudsman does. You have one role, to take complaints, investigate complaints. And I have the right to make a service complaint. And this is it. So the security guard, she was brilliant and said, not to worry, leave it with me. 10 minutes later, she comes back and she said, Mr. Colley, can you just follow me round to the back? And there's this breakout area. And there's two employees sitting there, both with laptops open, and they confirm they're senior managers of the Ombudsman from the complaints team. And we have an excellent 15-20 minutes where I outline what's the story. I condense it into about 10 minutes or so, and they're very empathetic and understanding, and they take a copy of the complaint and and confirm that they'll investigate it and they'll get back to me. It was incredibly respectful, and as you saw from the quote earlier, that's where I got the quote from that one of those managers, where she said, it's obviously been a very distressing journey for you and everything else. Utterly respectful to me. I was entirely respectful to them. So I now wait for the Ombudsman to come back on and respond to my complaint. I did not anticipate the letter I would get from the Ombudsman a few days later. Now, first of all, they didn't sign it by anybody. But when I dug into the metadata, if you look at the version on the right, it says the author is Mark Skeeney. Now, Mark Skeeney is the secretary of the Financial Ombudsman Service. He's right up there. He's, and this is sent on behalf of the executive team. And it's extraordinary. They say, for the avoidance of doubt, your cases and the associated service complaints are closed and will not be revisited. But as you can see in the next paragraph, or the third paragraph down, they refer to the fact that I forwarded them a copy of the Lloyd's confessions. And despite now being in possession of these confessions that prove that Lloyd's and Black Horse lied to me and lied to the Ombudsman, and also proves that the two Ombudsman decisions are utterly incorrect, as Baroness Mansell said, new evidence comes in, we will review our decisions. They're saying here they will not be revisited. What the hell? How is that possible? That is your job. You've got two decisions on file that utterly deny everything, and you've now got two confessions that prove those decisions are incorrect, if not false, right? And Lloyd's also have confessed to lying to me and lying to you. And that's it? You're not going to do anything. And they're not going, and they're confirming they will not respond to my new complaint based upon the FCA detailed grounds document that proves the corruption that took place in 2016 and 2019. But look what then they go on. They then gaslight me. Your behaviour is unreasonable and beyond what is acceptable under FOSS's unreasonable behaviour policy. It is unacceptable to visit FOSS's offices and film staff without their permission. I never filmed anybody. I never filmed anybody. Now, and then it goes on to say, it's unacceptable to make unfounded and false allegations to harass, alarm or distress Ombudsman staff. I didn't distress anybody. They were empathetic to me. It was the most courteous, respectful and professional visit and engagement you could possibly imagine, right? So, and to publish defamatory and harmful posts on social media naming individuals. It's not false or defamatory when everything I've alleged is true. You've seen the documents. You've seen the documents in this presentation tonight that proves everything. Every allegation I've made has been utterly truthful, right? But they're gaslighting me and they're making false representations, allegations, knowing full well that I was bringing this to the attention of the Treasury Select Committee. So it's ridiculous, right? So they come on, you're unreasonable down the bottom here, right? FOSS has not registered any new complaints for you at this stage. However, we must inform you that there is no guarantee FOSS will ultimately agree to take on another complaint from you, given your past and current unreasonable behaviour towards FOSS staff. Everything I've said is truth and fact. I've been courteous, reasonable, professional, all the way down the line. If I accuse you of making a false representation, and you have made a false representation, it's not unreasonable for me to make that. It's truth and fact. And you have no right to get upset at being called a liar if you've lied. That's on you. And if you're upset by that, that's on you. Don't lie. If you don't lie or make a false representation, I ain't publishing nothing. I'm not making a complaint about anything. And I don't make a complaint unless I know I'm right and I've got the evidence to prove it. And I certainly don't make an allegation like I'm making tonight unless I can prove it. And as you can see from this evidence, I can prove everything. I mean, it's extraordinary. They're now it's gaslighting, right? It's the Ombudsman has the discretion to conclude that cases from you are more suited to a court of law. So they're trying to deprive me of future access to the Ombudsman service because they're scared of me exposing further corruption or what? I don't know. But your unreasonable conduct towards FOSS staff is causing some of them to feel harassed, alarmed and distressed. I mean, what the hell? Don't lie. If you lie and I can prove the lie, and I prove it with evidence, you can't get upset about you're just being upset because you got found out. That's on you. That's not on me. I mean, and I've not abused anybody. I've been, I'm firm when I make a position, but I couldn't be more respectful and I haven't been more respectful. So we do not require or invite a response to this letter. On the contrary, listen to this. If you respond along the lines of your recent correspondence, where I've made allegations, all supported with evidence, FOSS may seek legal advice on the options available to it, right? They are making threats. If I dare correspond with them again and make these allegations all proven with evidence, they're threatening to come after me. I mean, seriously? This is the Financial Ombudsman Service. That's it. I mean...
Well, Paul, take a breather, Paul. Take a breather. Okay, I'll speak for a couple of minutes. I've just put a note in the chat, folks. I've said, is this kind of stuff that connects what Paul is explaining to the egregious miscarriages of justice that resulted in Tom and Carlo being wrongly sent to jail? I can't escape thinking that there is a pile of evidence here, both in the miscarriages of justice in the libel case and the entire full, true car finance scandal, to show that there has been collusion. There has been corruption. There's been fraud by omission, fraud by misrepresentation, and a long list of other things. Misfeasance in public office, surely, if the sort of thing that Paul has been describing does not count as misfeasance in public office, then something's wrong somewhere. That is why this stuff is so serious. When I started TTF 10 years ago, Martin White put a note in the chat. We were worried about things like people not being told the full truth and their costs and charges in their pensions and their investments. That was bad. But this is an entirely different universe of bad. This is the sort of thing you'd expect in a banana bleeding republic, not public bodies in the United Kingdom. And what's really worrying is how hard Paul has had to work to get two things. Firstly, anybody in the media to properly pick it up. Thank goodness for the BBC. Thank goodness for the BBC, because their programme about the car finance scandal started to pry open the can of worms that is here. They couldn't open it completely. There were obviously limitations for all kinds of reasons, including the amount of time that you can have on a documentary. but they did start prying it open, and it ain't going to get closed until everything's exposed. Paul's just not the kind of person who gives up, not when he knows he's right. My goodness me, the bloke is a national bloody treasure. Do you realise, ladies and gentlemen, if people in the authorities had acted when Paul gave them all the evidence they needed to act, the bill for the car finance scandal would probably been about a third, Paul, of what it's actually going to be. Literally, billions of pounds of damage has been done because they didn't listen to Paul Carlier. No, worse than that, they did listen to him and they chose to actively ignore him. Willful blindness.
Well, I think it was. My estimates are, because obviously, what happens if it goes unchecked? It gets worse. So they were ramping up the amount they were making on commissions. So I think if they'd have acted in 2016, somewhere between 2 and 5 billion would probably have been the total redress. But of course, when it goes unchecked, it just keeps on going. I mean, some of the cases I've got and that I've worked on, I mean, are just astonishing. But you're now looking at a total bill. It's only 15 billion when the incentivised commission arrangements, and that's separate from the Supreme Court. Don't make the mistake of thinking that that's one and the same, right? The FOSS decisions, specifically incentivised commission arrangements, that's locked in. Barclays are trying to appeal it via the court in the Court of Appeal, but the High Court absolutely kicked Barclays' ass in, on the judicial review, thanks to that FCA document and the FOSS. So it's locked in. Everyone's going to get back the difference in interest they paid compared to what they could have got if they put the lowest APR on. The Supreme Court is dealing with a different issue that has afforded consumers what they call rescission. So in other words, if you're getting redress or equal to the amount that you would have got had your APR been the lowest, be it 4%, 5% or 6%, whatever that lender's bands are, the rescission will give you every penny back, the rest of it. So in other words, every penny in interest. So, and that's estimated that's going to add another 15 billion. So it could be total 30 billion. So, but only 15 billion is riding on the Supreme Court decision. The other 15 billion is locked in my opinion anyway. So, but it could have all been stamped out. But now they're using the sheer quantum of this that is the result of all these firms wrongdoing. And and there's 3 other practices that haven't been revealed. One of them was criminal. One of them was, I'm going to explain it here. One of them was advance commissions. Now, in 2013, all the firms knew that the FCA's taken over regulation of the Consumer Credit Act in 2014. So, and we're going to have to disclose commissions to people if they ask. I mean, what a ridiculous rule. You could disclose commissions, but only if someone asks. I mean, who knew to ask? I mean, that's the ridiculousness of that. But because they were worried that this would be exposed, they came up with 3 practices, or certainly 2 practices, that was literally designed to circumvent the Consumer Credit Act. One of them, and I failed to see how this was not criminal. And this is, the FCA discovered this and they buried it. And I think this is the problem. They discovered all these practices and thought, Jesus Christ, we can't go public with this. It's so bad. This practice was, they conceived this practice in December 13. Like, what we're going to do, we'll pay the dealers the commissions in advance. So that way, if a customer says, oh, how much commission you pay? Nothing, no commission payable to us on the completion of this agreement, because technically it'd already been paid in advance. But what they did, and this is what, in my opinion, makes it criminal, they disguised these advance commissions as loans to the dealer. So, and one dealer I've got, it's $100,000 loan, and it's because they were making so much in commissions, and then it would obviously be rolled over each year. So technically, and they were saying, oh yeah, for business purposes. Bullshit. It wasn't for business purposes. It was advance commissions disguised as a loan. And in those terms, you got it interest free, this loan, but you had to put X amount of business through us each month to qualify, otherwise we'd call the loan in, which wasn't a loan, it was the advance commissions. So I don't see how that's not criminal, because you brought it in entirely to circumvent the Consumer Credit Act and the rights of individuals that were afforded by that Consumer Credit Act. You can't pay advance commissions and disguise it as a loan for your business. How is that not criminal? So that, but all that's yet to come out properly. So yeah.
Before Paul, I can't really find the right words to describe what I want to say, but you and I speak daily, sometimes more than once or twice a day. You're an absolute national treasure, Mr. Paul Carlier. You really, really are. There's something quite unique about your mindset. Um, for reasons we understand, you've got this complete zero tolerance of dishonesty, and you can't let go of something. If somebody's trying to tell you that 2 and 2 adds up to 5, you can't let go. You won't let go. You haven't let go. Any normal human being would have crumbled years ago, Paul, but you just haven't done it. It's astonishing what you're doing here for the public good. And I said earlier, it's amazing how hard you've had to work to get the media to cover the story. Thank goodness for the BBC for beginning the process of prizing open that tightly closed can of worms, and how hard you've had to work to get parliamentarians to take notice. Now, the good news, folks, a while ago, Paul presented a mini version of what he's explained tonight and the other week to some of the members of the APPG who were very, very interested in this. And Paul has kindly volunteered to write a report for the APPG that's going to document everything. And the APPG will then decide what to do with it. It's not my decision what they decide to do it, but it's the APPG's decision what they decide to do with it. But the APPG will have it at its fingertips, all the proof, all the evidence, all the narrative, all the disclosures, all the challenges, all the names, all the emails, all the bleeding everything.
I think, and the one thing as well, it took me 13 years. I'm a financial markets trader with 28 years experience working for many of the world's largest banks. I know this stuff inside out, and it took me 13 years to get those confessions from lawyers. But what chance has anybody else got? And that's not being disrespectful to anybody else. But
No, we know.
That's what you're up against. I mean, it's how can the ordinary consumer deal with such, and it is corruption. I don't know another word to use to describe what I've laid out before you tonight. I don't see how it's not corruption.
Before we do anything else, I can see that hands up from me and Duffield, people like Mark Bannister and others as well, which we'll go to in a second. Before we do, can I please invite you to, in the most grateful way you can, salute the work of Paul Carlier with me now, because it really is outstanding. And Paul, we are so indebted to you, so indebted to you. Thank you very much, Paul. We're going to ask everybody to be the very succinct version of themselves that they possibly can be. But I am happy to let this conversation roll because it's that significant. I see Paul's got his manual hand up because he doesn't know how to do the digital one. We'll get to you, Mr. Paul Birch. We're going to go to Ian Duffield first, then we'll move on after Ian. Please all be as succinct as you can. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I will be succinct, and my apologies. I will have to leave just after sharing this with you.
Sure.
But I received, I think it was today, or if not today, within the last couple of days, Lloyds have announced their second quarter results. Their profit, which was expected to be 1.8 billion, has gone up to 2 billion. But I just want to share with you an analysis by, of all people, Hargreaves Lansdown on these results. So just bear with me 1 second while I get it up, and I'll just read it out. And this is their assessment of Lloyd's share position. The key risk in the short term is the investigation into the mis-selling of motor finance. Lloyd's is more exposed than other peers and has now set aside a total of 1.2 billion in preparation for potential costs. We're cautiously optimistic, that's Hargreaves Lansdown, that provisions plus what's already been reflected in the valuation will be sufficient, but it's hard to say what the outcome will be. Lloyds remains one of our preferred names in the sector, with strong capital levels that will hopefully support returns to shareholders over the next few years. That said, the valuation isn't as attractive as it once was, and the impending Supreme Court decision on motor finance is likely to cause volatility. There are no guarantees. It then goes on to talk about the financial sector is medium risk in terms of environmental, social and governance risk. product governance is the largest risk for most companies, especially those in the US and Europe, with enhanced regulatory scrutiny. Data privacy and security is also an increasingly important risk for banks. Business ethics, ESG, again, the environmental, social and government risk, integration, labour relations are also worth monitoring. The FCA's investigation into historical auto lending practices between 2007 and 2021 is a risk for Lloyds. Provisions have been taken, but the scale of the potential impact is largely unknown. More details should come soon. There's room for improvement in product governance and responsible marketing. There's an understatement. Though it demonstrates strong progress, I find this difficult to understand. Though it demonstrates strong progress in integrating ESG factors into asset management and corporate financing.
Thanks,
So
Ian.
that's from Hargreaves Lansdowne commenting on the share position of Lloyds.
Ian, thank you. There, we'll if we may, Ian, we'll hold it there because we have to be quite.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you,
you,
Paul. I'm sorry, I need to go now. Okay.
Thank you.
Well,
Thanks, Ian. Thank you. That's really nice to know. Paul, could you? We'll get to Paul Birch in a second. Paul, could you just briefly recap what happened in front of the board at Lloyd's last year? Thank you.
Yeah. So basically, I don't know if you remember, but last February, after the announcement came out about the FOSS decisions, Lloyd's share price dropped over the next 2 weeks, I think, something between 15 and 20%, because people were talking about, oh, this is going to cost Lloyd's like 2-3 billion. But then in, I think it was February or early March, Lloyd's in their accounts set aside only 450 million and said that this was their best estimate as to the true cost and total liability on car finance. It's just utter nonsense. So at the AGM, I challenged Robin Budenberg and said, that figure is nonsense because your 450 million probably doesn't even cover the legal fees and administrative costs of dealing with this redress scheme and investigations that's coming, let alone the compensation, and I said, by my calculations, it's going to cost you a minimum of 2.5 billion in total costs and compensation if only part of the interest has to be repaid, and a minimum of 4.5 billion if you have to repay every penny of interest. And he said, no, well, that's our best guess. I said, it can't be your best guess because the number's nonsense. You should be having to put a range of numbers because you've clearly lowballed this number with intent to mislead the market to get the share price to recover because you're all paid by the share price performance, right? So, and he was adamant. And I said, well, what you're doing, you're lowballing it because this will take a few years. And then what you're going to do, you're going to just feed in a little bit more here, a little bit more there. So it basically no one really notices. But by the end of it, like PPI, you kept increasing the provision, so that it didn't impact on the share price and didn't bother your bonuses as much as it might do. That's basically the problem. You are going to increase this. And sure enough, in February this year, they increased the provision to 1.2 billion. And, I challenged them again at the AGM this year and said, well, I said you were going to increase the provision. And Kate Cheetham, senior counsel at Lloyd's, passed him a note. And because I said, so did you mislead shareholders last year? He was adamant, no. And he read the paper, said, no, basically the additional provision is because of the Court of Appeal decision that came out in October. So I said, yeah, and that potentially means you have to repay every penny in interest. I gave you the two options last year, 2.5 billion minimum cost and compensation and all the admin and legal costs if you have to repay part, and 4.5 billion minimum if you have to repay all, which is what the Court of Appeal decision was going to imply. So, and he said, no, we had to make the extra provision for that. So I said, okay, then, if the Supreme Court finds in your favour, presumably you're going to reverse that upward adjustment back down to 450 million, yes? We just don't know. Well, no, you just literally said the only reason for that increase in provision was the Court of Appeal decision that came out in October. So surely then what you're saying is if the Supreme Court overturns that decision, you're going to move the provision back down to 450 million, yeah? And he just refused to answer the question. Yeah, of course you don't, because it's bullshit. It's got nothing to do with it. It's part of the feeding in an additional amount so that it keeps the share price steady and doesn't affect their bonuses.
This is spectacular. This is absolutely spectacular. We're going to go to Mr. Paul Birch, then Mr. Mark Bannister, then back to Mr. Paul Kiley for some final comments. Then I'll say some words and then we'll wrap up. I figure we're going to wrap up in about 10 minutes' time, roughly, folks. It's been a bit of a marathon session, but it's been absolutely brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Paul Birch.
Yeah, I'll be as brief as I can. A lot of you on this presentation will be aware that I have been battling since 2011 regarding my CureOps pension scam. And I don't know if anybody else has noticed, but today the SFO published a press release which reads, SFO charges 6 people in complex pension fraud investigation. Suspected criminality involves £75 million worth, or £75 million invested into storage units. Now, this is part of related to a hearing which was being held before the appeal court in London, which was adjourned on what was scheduled to be the last afternoon of that hearing, because a court official interrupted the judge and said, I need to hand you this document, which I believe means that the court hearing hitherto is going to be compromised. And I am convinced that this SFO investigation was part of that information that was passed to her. And again, I think this is just the tip of an iceberg. The whole system is corrupt, compromised, and it's a national and international disgrace. The way that, money talks, it's just wrong, totally wrong.
But thank you, Paul. Paul Birch, thank you for the work that you do on an international basis, helping to drag the truth to the surface the way that you do and helping to hold people to account. Somebody else who does that brilliantly is Mark Bannister. Mark Bannister.
Andy, thanks very much. Paul, I've heard this story from you previously, and every time I hear it again, I'm re-shocked, and I can only commend you in the greatest way possible on behalf of everybody who won't have a chance to say it personally. What an amazing story. And there are an awful lot of people who will owe you a great deal. And on behalf of all of them, I say thank you. But more than that, I say thank you because I think you're upholding great English values. And that's incredibly, incredibly important, because if we do not have the rule of law, we have nothing. And if our leaders in society do not recognize that, they do not deserve to be leaders. And we need to hunt them down and hunt them out and cast them away, because they are undermining society. And I sit there thinking about your mother-in-law and the detriment that was caused to her. And I'm sure she was not alone, quite obviously. And that is just wrong. And you were talking about provisions. The reason they make them very slowly is obviously their balance sheet is geared. So the moment you make a provision, it's money straight off the balance sheet. Effectively, you can't use it. So if it doesn't work this way, but arguably, let's suppose they've got a 10-to-1 leverage. If you make a true, let's say, 5 billion provision, which is the real amount, then you've just lopped 50 billion off your balance sheet capacity. And that is hugely material to the bank, and that's why they don't do it. Is it dishonest? Absolutely, it's dishonest. But that's the background to it. And then the other thing, you were talking about commissions, and I put it in the chat. When you make pay a commission as a loan, right, you create a false asset on your balance sheet. Okay, because you've loaned money to somebody. The implication of that is you're going to get it back. That's an asset on the bank's balance sheet. But in fact, it's not. It's a
Accounting fraud.
liability because
Okay.
it's something that you're actually going to pay away.
Is
And
that accounting fraud, Mark?
yes, absolutely. It's 100%. You speak to Ian, Andy,
Entirely.
he will confirm exactly what I'm saying. It's 100% accounting fraud, irrespective of anything else that it is. And of course, it's a fraud in many, many other respects.
Powerful
So
stuff, Mark.
there you go.
Thank
Thank
you
you
very,
again, Paul. Amazing.
absolutely amazing. Thank you, Mark. Great
Thanks,
insights.
Mark.
But we've ended up with a community of people with such incredible knowledge. Not only is the knowledge incredible, the ability to share it is incredible. And those two things together mean we have a chance, folks, in basically overthrowing what is a rotten system. More on that in due course. Mr. Paul Carlier, we're all very grateful to you, Paul. These words are very genuine. We're all very grateful to you. You're a one-off, Paul. You really are. What else would you like to tell us, Paul?
Well, the story doesn't end there because I'm not going to rest until we get proper redress for what they put my family through and what they put me through. And there's no way I'm accepting that utter gaslighting document from the ombudsman. So, and here's a story. Then here's the thing, right? So they made these false allegations about what I did when I attended their offices, right? You filmed us, you filmed our staff, unacceptable. You were abusive, aggressive, and everything else. Now, I pushed back hard and said, right, that's absolutely outrageous. I did none of that. These are false allegations, and I did a DSAR. I want the footage, the CCTV footage from the reception area and the breakout area behind. Right, there were cameras there. So, and I was there for about an hour and a half in total, mostly waiting before somebody eventually came down. So obviously that's my personal information. I'm entitled to that under a DSAR. So anyway, I wait. They acknowledge receipt. Yeah, okay, yeah, we'll get that. So anyway, I wait, and 35 days later, I get a response saying, "Dear Ms. Scully, we obtained the footage. We looked at it, but it wasn't clear, and it wasn't what you had requested, and anyway, now it's past the 30 days, so it's been deleted." So I'm sorry, what? It clearly still existed when you looked at it, but you waited until a day after the 30 days expired, so before telling me, so that I couldn't review the footage. I mean, I just said, and you knew there was a live complaint about this, so you literally
Broad evidence.
You destroyed evidence to so that you could keep up these false narrative and false allegations. Now, and they're maintaining these false allegations. Well, but I just couldn't get my head around it. You literally, it was still on your servers when you looked at it. Why didn't you tell me then? Oh, it's not clear and it's not what you requested. No, because that was nonsense. Because they still have to tell me that. It doesn't matter whether you think it's clear or not. You still have to disclose it to me. It's my personal information. So they just simply waited a few days. Oh, it's deleted now. Is it really deleted? Because whoever requested it would have meant that the copy they had was no longer on the server that gets automatically deleted. But there is hope, because I wasn't about to go into the Ombudsman lion's den unprotected. So I didn't video anybody, but I did make an audio recording of my visit. So I can prove I was nothing but utterly respectful, professional when I spoke to these employees at all times, and they were nothing but utterly respectful and empathetic towards me. It was the most courteous of engagements, utterly contrary to what the board produced in that they created false narratives with intent to gaslight me, smear me, because obviously I was bringing this to the attention of the Treasury Select Committee as well. So I've got them, and I'm not going to rest until they're held accountable. I've got the confessions from Lloyd's. We are going to get appropriate redress for my family members for what they put us through, and I'm going to make sure that people are held accountable to this. You don't get to do this and then just get to walk away. Sorry.
Not in our country. You might in other countries that don't have the rule of law, but not in this country. Our standards our standards are there. And if people aren't meeting them, then something's gone wrong. Paul, thank you
Yeah.
so much.
Problem is, when you're dealing with Russia or someone else, right, you know it's corrupt. So you cut your cloth accordingly, right? You go, okay, I just need to be careful. There's this illusion that the UK, we're a democratic society and everything else, and it's just utter nonsense. You know, these public bodies have statutory duties, right, that are enshrined in law, right? The GDPR, the provision of those recordings, that's not like, I mean, the Fraud Act has a provision for that. Fraud, by failing to disclose information, you've got a legal obligation to disclose. They don't care. But what we've seen in Tom's case, the entire hierarchy of oversight is intertwined, it's incestuous, and it's corrupted. There is no other way to put it. You've seen, Andy, firsthand what the ICO tried to do to cover up the Freedom of Information request to protect the FCA. I had to go all the way to the first tier tribunal. I'm not an information law specialist. I know my way around it. Don't get me wrong, but I had to take on the FCA and the ICO in the first tier tribunal and their external lawyers and barristers, and I won. I mean, but I should never have been because it was so ridiculous. I won because they were just covering each other's asses, and we got former FCA senior manager has confirmed that the ICO will never take action against the FCA because the ICO needs the FCA to be its eyes and ears on GDPR compliance in the financial markets. It is the ultimate, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. And there's this brotherhood or sisterhood of regulators, like the Insolvency Service in Blackmore Bond. Absolutely bow to the pressure. Don't take any action against Blackmore Bond directors for the fraud and Ponzi scheme that you know it was, because otherwise that's going to expose us, the FCA, for not having identified it and taken action. So the Insolvency Service went, yeah, whatever you say, we'll go along with that. You know, it's just
Amazing.
It's shocking.
It's amazing. It's shocking. David can sometimes beat Goliath. It happened yesterday. Tom and Carlo won. Paul's going to win because he's got right on his side and he ain't going to give up. He's not going to give up. So long as there's at least one person that hasn't given up, there's hope for the rest of us. Can we please once again show our appreciation to Paul Carlier as I share my final thoughts. I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to share my screen to take you to a couple of places. I'm going to take you to TTF's webpage to do with the open letters. So you go to downloads bit and then you go to open letters, and then you'll see the open letters we've written that go all the way back to 2015. Yeah, 2015. Some of them are marked as 2025. We got them in the wrong place anyway. So we've been writing open letters for 10 years, and I'm going to draw your attention to the ending of the one we sent on Tuesday morning following the BBC Money Box. So the general narrative in the letter to Meg Hillier and her colleagues at the Treasury Committee is, please do what we believe the Treasury Committee is meant to do and look into things in the interests of the public, things that relate to the workings of the financial system, the Treasury, the FCA, etc., etc. I'm going to read out the last bit. Bear with me. The call to action. Will the Treasury Select Committee act, please? Oh, and by the way, folks, the reason I'm reading this out is, to my mind, it would be an absolute no-brainer that if I was the Treasury Select Committee, I would reach out to Paul Carlier first thing and say, Mr. Carlier, please come and give us your evidence. That's what I would do. It's obvious. Bear that in mind as I read this out, folks, okay? All we want is responsible, not reckless regulation. And for that to happen, we need your committee to take the action necessary for all the reasons set out in my open letter to you the 16th of July and this one. If your committee doesn't do what is needed, then who else can we turn to that has the power, position and predisposition to provide the parliamentary scrutiny, accountability and challenge that is on the critical path towards the kind of transparent, truthful, trustworthy and ridiculously successful UK financial services sector we all want? I believe my polite and respectful request for your committee to act is entirely in keeping with the sentiments you shared, this is Dame Meg Hillier shared, when becoming chair of the Treasury Committee back in September last year. The new chair, Dame Meg Hillier MP, said, "It is a privilege to become chair of the Treasury Committee. I look forward to working with my fellow MPs to scrutinise the actions of this country's most prominent financial institutions over the course of the next Parliament. During my 9-year tenure leading the Public Accounts Committee, I learned a thing or two about the mistakes governments can make with taxpayers' money. I will work day in and day out as chair of the Treasury Committee to ensure His Majesty's Treasury and its affiliated public bodies are managing the public finances in the best interest of the British public." And of course, ladies and gentlemen, you'll know, I'm sure, that the Financial Conduct Authority, the Financial Ombudsman Service are most definitely within the Treasury Committee's remit. I went on to say, "I hope you don't mind me putting this request to you. Your thoughts, please, Dame Meg Hillier MP and your colleagues. I look forward to hearing from you with the greatest respect to you all." And I'm going to put this to the camera now. Dame Meg Hillier, if you do watch this session, which I hope you do, I'll certainly be making it available to you and your colleagues and others. If you do watch this session, then please give us the benefit of the doubt. At the very, very worst, even out of just idle curiosity, give Mr. Paul Carlier and other key people who can bring a lot of truth to you the chance to do exactly that. They are working in the public interest. You do too. Please do the right thing and invite Mr. Paul Carlier and other key people to give you the evidence that ought to be given. I'm going to close on by making direct reference to a couple of final points. I'm actually feeling I think this is a pivotal moment, Paul. Yeah, this is a bit of a pivotal moment. Yeah, this is like a watershed moment. We're either going to find out, Paul, whether the entire system is rotten or if there are bits of it still left that are functioning. We're going to find that out over the next few weeks, aren't we? We're going to find it out. I hope it does work. I really do hope it does work. In our slide deck here, we asked, do we have a sense of deja vu? Because you'll remember I spoke earlier about the idea that perhaps there's a sense of deja vu around some of this. Do you have a sense of deja vu? Are the financial regulators guilty of the same failings in the car finance scandal as they were in the PPI scandal and the LIBOR scandal? And if so, what does that tell us about whether they are fit for purpose? And if they are shown to not be fit for purpose, does the car finance scandal and the LIBOR scandal pose an existential threat to them? In other words, should organizations that are not fit for purpose carry on functioning? I don't think they should. They should either reform or they should be replaced with something that does work. All the time we have a hierarchy of oversight that is dysfunctional, whether by design or accident, whether it's people deliberately doing a bad job, acting in bad faith, or through incompetence. All the time we have a system that's not functioning, we are jeopardizing the integrity of UK financial services, economic growth, and the well-being of the citizens in our country. That should be obvious to everybody. We're going to end on this. Paul, every time I think of this quote, I think of you in this context. You're just such an absolute superstar. And what you are as a human being speaks to this. Robert F. Kennedy back in the 60s, and we'll be closing on this, folks. Robert F. Kennedy back in the 60s, he said, "Every time we turn our heads the other way, when we see the law flouted, when we tolerate what we know to be wrong, when we close our eyes and ears to the corrupt because we are too busy or too frightened, when we fail to speak up and speak out, we strike a blow against freedom and decency and justice." That's what this is all about. Do we want a society with standards and integrity and ethics and good behavior? Or are we content living in a society where we don't have that? Are we going to support and honour and recognise Paul Carley and people like him? Or are we going to throw them under the bus? Treasury Select Committee, essentially, that's the question we're putting to you. I don't know how else to do it. We've tried every possible way to ask your committee to engage and to look at the evidence. Please do that. Once again, everybody, thank you very much indeed, everybody, for being with us this marathon session tonight, and of course, in particular, Mr. Paul Carlier. Thank you all very much indeed. Any final comments, Paul? Any final comments, Paul, before we bow out?
No, just keep the faith and keep up the fight. As Tom proved yesterday, if you're right, just keep going. Try one tip. It helped me, and I know it's sort of helped Tom as well. You know, it's soul destroying and it's tough, but try and treat it as like a hobby. So some people collect stamps, some people play golf. I'm too old to play football anymore. So my hobby is pursuing personal justice for me and my family, right? So it doesn't interfere with my day job. It's affected the past, right? That's infected and everything else, but don't let it infect your present and your future. So that's the way I do it. It doesn't work. Maybe it's not for everybody, but that's the way I do it. It's my hobby, and that's the only way I can process it. So it doesn't infect anything else.
Good on you, Paul. Thank you very much. Good night, everybody.
Cheers.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Cheers, Paul.
Bye.
Thank you very, very much.